Washington had never sounded like this before. Filipino flags stretched across every section of the stadium. Voices collided off the walls, layering over each other until they became one continuous roar. And when Alex Eala walked toward the baseline, thousands of fans rose to their feet at once, not politely, not out of courtesy, but like something historic was about to happen, and everyone in the building already knew it. The scoreboard would eventually read 6-2, 7-6, with the tiebreak closing at 7-1. The defending Washington champion was gone. But rewind the clock 20 minutes, and you'd have sworn this match was about to end in the exact opposite way. Alex Eala was trailing 1-5 in the second set. Leylah Fernandez had ripped off 5 straight games and stood one hold away from forcing a third set. Every rally seemed to bend in her favor. Every Eala error made the comeback feel further away. Even the loud Filipino crowd had gone quiet with worry because on paper, this match was already decided. Then, something happened that no scoreboard could ever fully explain. Fernandez never earned a single set point. Not one. Not even close. What followed instead was one of the most dramatic momentum reversals of the tournament, point by point, game by game, until Washington witnessed a comeback few inside that stadium will ever forget. But to understand how that comeback happened, you have to rewind even further. Because Alex Eala didn't walk into this match alone. She walked in carrying an entire nation behind her. Thousands of miles from Manila, the atmosphere felt strangely familiar. Filipino flags waved from every corner. Fans wore national colors with pride. They chanted her name before warm-ups, between changeovers, after nearly every big point, sometimes even during the points themselves, unable to hold it in. Tournament owner Mark Ein later revealed just how loud that anticipation had become before the match even started. The ticket office kept fielding the same question over and over from people who had never asked about a lower-ranked player with this much urgency before. When is Alex Eala playing? Not the defending champion, not the top seed. Alex Eala. For many in that crowd, this wasn't just another WTA match, it was a chance to watch someone carry an entire country's hopes onto one of America's biggest tennis stages. People who had never watched a tiebreak in their lives were about to sit through one of the tensest in recent memory, simply because of who was playing. Every cheer carried weight. Every flag carried pride. Every point felt heavier than a ranking or a trophy. Even Eala seemed surprised by the size of the support waiting for her. She'd played in front of passionate crowds before, but never quite like this. Every glance toward the stands reminded her she wasn't alone out there. The crowd couldn't hit a single forehand for her. They couldn't return a serve or fix a broken rhythm, but they could make sure she never felt like she was fighting by herself. And on a night like this, that mattered more than it usually would. And she needed that, because across the net stood someone who knew exactly how to win in Washington. Leylah Fernandez was the defending champion, familiar with the court, the conditions, and the specific kind of pressure that comes with protecting a title instead of chasing one. She'd already beaten Eala convincingly in Stuttgart earlier in the season, and she knew what that scoreline meant walking in. History, comfort, and confidence all pointed her way. But Eala brought something just as dangerous, something far harder to prepare for. Momentum. Weeks earlier, she had stunned the tennis world by beating the reigning Wimbledon champion. Just one round before this match, she had battled past Olympic champion Zheng Qinwen, dropping the first set, falling behind a break in the second, and still finding a way through by making adjustments instead of panicking. Those wins weren't luck. They revealed something opponents were starting to fear every time they saw her name on the draw. Eala had developed a habit of solving problems mid-match instead of collapsing under them. Against Zheng, she solved power-absorbing pace until the openings appeared. Against Wimbledon champion Iga Swiatek weeks earlier, she solved pressure, refusing to blink against one of the most dominant players in the sport. Now, a new test stood in front of her, one built entirely on experience and composure rather than raw firepower. From the very first game, Eala refused to let Fernandez settle. She crashed the baseline, attacked second serves, stole time away before Fernandez could set her feet. Instead of chasing highlight reel winners, she made Fernandez play one uncomfortable shot after another, over and over, until discomfort became a pattern. It worked almost perfectly. Fernandez couldn't find her rhythm. Her forehand leaked errors. Her serves stopped producing free points. Every rally seemed to unfold exactly the way Eala had scripted it before the match even began. The first set vanished in a blur, 6-2. The Filipino section erupted. This wasn't a surprise anymore. Their star wasn't just competing with the defending champion. She was dismantling her, piece by piece, in front of thousands of people who had traveled or tuned in specifically to see it happen. For a moment, Washington looked ready to celebrate a routine upset. But champions rarely go quietly, and sometimes all it takes is one service game, one shift in body language, one fist pump at the right moment to flip an entire match on its head. The momentum had completely reversed. Minutes earlier, Eala looked ready to close out one of the biggest wins of her season in straight sets. Now the scoreboard told a completely different story. 1-5. Fernandez had stormed back with 5 consecutive games. Her movement sharpened. Her forehand found depth again. Confidence returned with every winner, while Eala's timing started to slip just enough for the crowd to notice. From the stands, it looked like Washington was heading for a third set. But the scoreboard was hiding something important. Despite 5 straight games, Fernandez had never actually earned a set point. Not at 3-1. Not at 4-1, not even at 5-1. That single detail would decide the entire night. The shift had started in one exhausting service game, deuce after deuce, Fernandez forced to defend against relentless returns from Eala. She eventually escaped it with a brilliant backhand winner on her 6th game point, and something in her changed instantly. She pumped her fist. She walked faster between points. The frustration that had followed her through the entire first set disappeared in a single moment. Confidence spreads fast in tennis, almost like a current running through a player's whole game. Her forehand, a liability, minutes earlier, began finding corners it hadn't found all match. Her defense forced Eala into extra shots in every rally. 1 game became 2. 2 became 3. 3 became 5. Suddenly, the defending champion stood 1 game from leveling the match completely. Many young players panic here. They chase impossible winners, rush points, try to erase 4 games in one desperate swing. That's usually when matches are lost for good. Eala refused the trap. Instead of trying to recover the whole set at once, she focused on winning exactly 1 point, nothing bigger. Nothing more ambitious than that. At 15:30, with Fernandez threatening to move within reach of multiple set points, Eala didn't force anything. She trusted her patterns, protected the middle of the court instead of hunting the lines, and accepted longer rallies instead of gambling everything on one shot. She held 2-5. It didn't look like much on paper. Inside the stadium, it felt different because now Fernandez had to serve out the set herself, and closing a set is never as simple as it looks from the stand. Winning points to build a lead requires freedom. Winning the final game requires carrying pressure on every single shot. And pressure changes everything, even for a defending champion who has closed out matches like this before. Fernandez rushed. She aimed closer to the lines, abandoned the patient game that had built her comeback in the first place. Eala did the opposite. She simplified everything down to its smallest parts. No panic, no unnecessary risk, just one more return, one more rally, one more difficult ball for Fernandez to deal with. She broke serve. 3-5, held again for 4-5. Suddenly, Fernandez was serving to stay in the set for a second time, and every missed forehand now carried real, visible consequence. One moment captured the entire turn of the match. Fernandez pushed forward, ready to attack the net and finish the point outright, then hesitated. Barely a heartbeat. But at this level, a heartbeat is enough to change everything. Eala recovered her court position, turned defense into a neutral rally, then turned that neutral rally into an attacking one. One heavy forehand pulled Fernandez wide, another opened the court completely. Then came the winner. 5-5. Washington exploded. Eala held again. 6-5. 5 consecutive games, the exact mirror of what Fernandez had just done to her only minutes before. The scoreboard had come full circle, as if the match had reset itself and started over with the momentum reversed. To her credit, Fernandez refused to fold completely. She held one final time and forced a tiebreak 7 points to decide an entire match that had already swung twice. But while the score was level, The confidence wasn't. Eala entered the breaker carrying belief and the roar of thousands of supporters. Fernandez entered it carrying the memory of a 5-1 lead that had slipped through her fingers just minutes earlier. In elite sport, a memory like that can become the heaviest opponent a player ever faces, heavier than anything standing across the net. From the first point of the tiebreak, Eala looked composed, no rush in her movement, no desperation in her shot selection, every swing carrying a clear purpose. Fernandez searched for quick answers and found only more mistakes. 2-0. The Filipino section erupted again, louder with every point, until Washington no longer sounded like a neutral tournament venue. For a few unforgettable minutes, it sounded like a home crowd that had traveled halfway around the world just for this. Fernandez pressed harder, aimed closer to the lines, abandoned patience completely in the search for a quick finish. Eala stayed disciplined, absorbed the pace, and waited for her window instead of chasing 4-1. Then came the shot that erased any remaining doubt, a deep forehand redirected cross-court, followed by another clean strike into open space that Fernandez had no answer for. 7-1. Match over. Filipino flags filled the air as strangers who had never met before stood together, celebrating something that had become far bigger than a single quarter-final. But the real story of this match wasn't the final winner or even the tiebreak. It was the decision Eala made at 1-5, when most players start fighting the scoreboard instead of the point directly in front of them. She broke the entire disaster into small, manageable pieces. One hold, one break, one return, one rally, then another. She never tried to erase 4 games with a single swing, because she understands something only experienced competitors ever learn. The scoreboard never changes all at once. It changes 1 point at a time, and only for the player patient enough to keep playing that way. This wasn't the first time she'd escaped a position that looked completely finished. At the 2025 US Open, she faced match point against Clara Tauson before clawing all the way back to give the Philippines its first ever Grand Slam main draw win of the Open era. Just days before this Washington match, she'd come from a set down against Olympic champion Zheng Qinwen through tactical adjustment rather than emotion. Different tournament, different opponents, different circumstances entirely. Yet the response stayed exactly the same every time. Patience before panic. Solutions instead of excuses. Weeks ago, she beat the reigning Wimbledon champion. Now, she'd eliminated the defending champion of Washington. These aren't isolated surprises anymore. They're signs of a player learning to solve a completely different problem against every opponent put in front of her. Against power, she adapts. Against speed, she adjusts. Against momentum turning against her, she stays calm and waits it out. And perhaps most importantly, she keeps believing long after most players would have already accepted defeat and started planning for the next round. The crowd didn't hit a single shot for her that night. But every time she won a hard point, the stadium reminded her that thousands of people still believed she could finish it. And every miss from Fernandez made the arena feel just a little heavier on her shoulders. By the final point, Washington no longer belonged to the defending champion. It belonged to Alex Eala and to a Filipino community that had turned one American stadium into something that felt, for one unforgettable night, remarkably close to home. Because rankings can tell you who starts as the favorite. They can't measure resilience. They can't measure composure under pressure. And they certainly can't measure what happens when a player refuses to surrender down 1-5 against a defending champion in front of thousands of her own people. Washington didn't just witness an upset that night. It witnessed the arrival of a competitor who refuses to look at the scoreboard until the very last point is played.